Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Good morning, everyone. Today we'll continue with the lecture on ultimacy. I think we started to discuss about the conditioned ultimate realities. We divided the ultimacy into two groups. That was conditioned realities and unconditioned realities. Then the conditioned reality was explained as fourfold. That was Paramatta Dhammas, Upadino Dhamma, Paramatta Jatika, and Anupanna Dhamma. Then we started to discuss very basic characteristics of Paramatta Dhammas. If I sum up all what we have done so far, we mentioned Paramatta Dhamma is a reality that arises as a separate entity and also has an intrinsic nature. It has its own intrinsic nature. To be true, to be called as an ultimate thing, like whatever the category it belongs to, whether it's conditioned or unconditioned, whether it falls into Paramatta Dhamma or Paramatta Jatika, whatever it is, the very basic characteristic of ultimate things in Buddhism is that they possess a certain intrinsic nature. That is the basic criterion to decide whether something is ultimate or a concept. Concepts do not have any intrinsic natures. They are synthetic objects of the mind. They are synthesized by the mind looking into the ultimate realities. Ultimate realities, they are with the intrinsic nature, and later we discussed that the nature and the reality are identical. They are not different. There's no dictum in them. There's no duality. So it's the reality and the nature is the same. So the very basic characteristic of a reality is it has its own intrinsic nature, and it arises when to be called a Paramatta Dhamma. It needs to have arising. It's connected with arising. Then these Paramatta Dhammas are empirically observable. They are not something completely hidden as the ultimate natures explained by expressed by some philosophers. They are observable, tangible to our life, to our mind. But what happens is when we experience these tangible objects like realities, we tend to cover them with concepts. Then Paramatta Dhammas are also another approach to explain them in the intellectual analysis. During the intellectual analysis of finding out what really is, what is there. When we come into the intellectual analysis, things that cannot be divided any further, things that cannot be analyzed any further, are also called ultimate realities. It means we take a certain object like a table, which is a concept according to Buddhism. So then we investigate it, like we find what are the components of this table, what is it constituted with. So then in this process, when we go further and further, we go deep and penetrates into the object. we come into a place where things that are we get the things that are cannot be reducible, that are not reducible, that cannot be reduced anymore. So if something cannot be reduced intellectually any further, that is called a Paramatta Dhamma. Physically irreducible and intellectually irreducible are two things. According to the Theravadians, physically or practically irreducible. Practically reducible means they always, like for instance, a cluster of rupas, they are physically irreducible according to Theravadians. So we call them the tiniest particle. We gave a name called Rupa Kalapa, if you remember. Rupa Kalapa. Rupa Kalapa is a cluster of rupas together. So this cluster cannot be divided any further practically, because in the actual reality, they exist in the cluster is what exists. But intellectually, according to Buddhism, it is made out of certain natures, material characteristics. So intellectually, the Rupa Kalapa is reducible, but practically it is not reducible. So practically, physical reduction and also intellectual reduction is two things. So things that cannot be, the things that defies us further intellectual division, reduction is called ultimate realities. When we come to mentalities also, we have the same thing. If you remember, we call the cluster of mentalities is called Chittupada. It was given a name, Chittupada. Mind and mental factors arise together in a cluster. In the practical sense, that is how they appear. That is how they are found. We cannot separate them practically, like in nature. But intellectually, we find in a mental cluster. Mental cluster means main function of these mental clusters is to cognize an object, to deal with an object. So they cognize the object. So in this cognition means the act of knowing an object. So when we analyze this cognition, this act, we find separate, distinct natures, mental qualities in them. Therefore, a mental cluster is also irreducible practically, but intellectually it is possible. Therefore, Paramatta Dhammas are the things that we find at the bottom in our intellectual analysis to find out the reality. We cannot divide a Paramatta Dhamma into parts. Then we also discuss about another fundamental, that Paramatta Dhammas are mere qualities, natures, and they do not have a shape, they do not have a they do not consume any space. They are not things, they are mere qualities, characteristics we call. And then we mentioned that each and every Paramatta Dhamma has its own intrinsic nature and also its unique function. Unique function and having an intrinsic nature is a very basic quality of reality. These are the dynamics. Like we find these are the characteristics, like how do we consider something a reality. So it has to have a ultimate nature, intrinsic nature, and also functions, its own unique functions. A reality is different from another reality basically based on this intrinsic nature. Then we mentioned that these Paramatta Dhammas are twofold, mainly Nama and Rupa, materiality and mentality. So mentalities were divided again into two. chitta and cetasikas, and there is one chitta with the characteristic of knowing an object. It will be further explained from tomorrow. There are 89 chittas, like we can explain it in 89 ways. Then not tomorrow, sorry, the next week. So then we had 52 mental factors. We call them cetasikas. We had 52 mental factors. And then in the material sphere, we have 18 material qualities that are called ultimate realities. Then we also mention that these realities sometimes have, most of the time has secondary qualities. Secondary qualities. Other than their main functioning and main characteristic, they have secondary functions and secondary qualities. Like we explained about moha, it has a basic functioning of covering the mind from seeing the truth. It also has the secondary functions like binding us to the samsara, defiling our mind, preventing the arising of wholesome deeds. So these are all secondary qualities, functions of moha. So likewise, we have secondary qualities and secondary functions. And then also we discussed that the reality and the quality, the characteristic are identical. They are not two different things. It's not that we normally say Patavi has hardness. We normally say Patavi possesses the characteristic of hardness. That is just for the easiness of conveying the idea. It's a linguistic matter. But in reality, according to the Theravadians, the reality and the characteristic are identical. They are the same. The Patavi itself is hardness. Hardness itself is Patavi. Chitta itself is knowing an object. The act of knowing an object itself is the Chitta. So this is how the Paramattha Dhammas are explained. Then we also finally discussed there are number of suttas to verify that the Buddha has expounded, advocated the existence of Paramattha Dhammas, according to his idea philosophy. So now today we start from here. We are going to discuss about the characteristics, another basic characteristic of conditioned realities. Basic characteristics of conditioned realities. If you go to the chart, we explained ultimacy, ultimate or ultimacy. Then we divide it into, so we use the Pali words, right? Sorry, we use the Pali words, easiness, paramattha. Then we have sankata paramattha. Then we have asankata paramattha. Sankata paramattha we have fourfold. Paramattha, paramattha dhamma. Then we have upadino dhamma. Paramattha jatika and anupanna dhamma. So here we had 5 types of nirvana, and then what is other than this is panyati, concepts. There is something in between that we also listed one day, but anyway, we'll just focus on this. So we are talking about this at the moment. The characteristics I already explained, revised, were about this. Now we are going to talk about some characteristics of these. These are all conditioned. They are all conditioned. Later we find that There are two types of conditioned natures. This is the actual conditioned sankata. These are called sankata jatika. It means they have they are not cannot be directly mentioned as conditioned realities, but they are not unconditioned. We'll come to that at the end of this chapter. So Paramattha Dhammas have conditioned characteristics. So Buddha mentioned about this conditioned characteristic in the Sankata Lakkana Sutta. You can find this in Anguttara Nikaya. Sankata Lakkana Sutta. The sutta which explains about the characteristics of conditioned realities. Characteristics of the conditioned realities. Sankata Lakkana Sutta. There he mentioned there are three characteristics of conditioned realities. Three characteristics of conditioned realities. So his statement was Tinimani Bhikkave Sankatassa Sankata Lakkanani. There are three characteristics of conditionality of a conditioned reality. A conditioned reality possesses three characteristics. These characteristics are called Sankata Lakkana, characteristics of conditioned. So what are these three characteristics? Upado Panyayati. An arising is seen, Upado Panyayati. Vayo Panyayati. Vanishing is seen. Titassa, T-H-I, Titassa, Anya Tattang Panyayati. Titassa Anya Tattang Panyayati. So these are the three characteristics. Upado Panyayati, Vayo Panyayati, Titassa Anya Tattang Panyayati. Panyayati means can be seen, can be promulgated, something like that. So these are the characteristics. Focus on these parts. Upada, arising. Vaya, vanishing. Titassa Anya Tattang, an alternation of the persisting, or means we can say alternation can be seen while persisting. So I'll repeat again. Upada is arising. Vaya is vanishing. Titassa Anya Tattang means an alternation, a change can be seen while persisting. So here we find actually 4 words. It is explained as 3 characteristics. 4 words, but 3 characteristics. So we're going to bring them into, we are going to have more insight about these terms. We're going to have more insights about these terms. So I shall erase this part. We are now focusing only on Paramattha Dhammas. So what are these 3 words? 4 words actually. We have Upada. Then we have Vaya. Don't worry about this O and R. These are grammatical matters. This is the stem of a verb. This is a declined word. Then we have Titha. Sorry, Anya Tatta. We have Anya Tatta. Right? And also we have Titha. Another word. Titha. Upada via Anyatatta. Or we can just change the position. It will be more easier then. Tita, and we have Anyatatta. Upada means arising. What does it mean by arising? Arising means, according to the Buddhism, Theravadians, something did not occur before, something did not occur, did not exist before, does not exist, and suddenly comes into the existence. Upada means the process by which something that does not exist comes into the phase of existence. Out of non-existence comes into existence. How it is possible? Because of causes, because of support of something else, support given by something else. So coming into existence is not happening without any cause. There are always reasons for something to arise. That reason is something other than this reality. Something other than this reality. Always the cause is not the same as the effect. If we call this B, the cause is A. A is causing B. So arising of B means if it occurs at this moment, if we say that B occurs at a certain point of time, it occurs here. This is the arising moment. So what does it say according to Buddhism? Before that moment, it did not exist. So this arising means this happening from a certain point of time, out of non-existence, it suddenly pops up, comes into existence. Why it happens? Because it is supported, given by A. Support given by another cause. Without this support, this reality would not come into existence. So that is called upada. So we can term it as arising. Upada is arising. Upada means arising. Then vaya we translate as vanishing. Now something which didn't exist has occurred, and after some time it vanishes. Vanishes means it disappears. After it disappears, it is not existing anymore. So it's like the opposite of arising. Arising means coming into existence from non-existence. Having not existed before, something comes into existence. Vanishing means having existed momentarily. Having existed, it comes into non-existence. Having existed, it comes into non-existence. So this is the opposite of upada. Upada means having not existed, coming into existence. Vaya means having existed, coming into non-existence. So this process by which it disappears, vanishes, is called vaya. We can call it vanishing or disappearing. Vanishing or disappearing. Then we have another term, titha. The word titha. Titha means, this titha have three ways of explanations according to the Theravadians. I'll just briefly explain what they are. The idea is the persisting moment. Persisting moment. The idea is persisting moment. One idea is a reality after coming into existence from non-existence. Its arising speed, occurrence, stops after some time, and it persists for a while, and then it disappears suddenly. So this phase between the arising and vanishing, the processes of arising and the process of vanishing, this phase between them is called titi. That is one explanation. It's a reality occurs, stays for a while, and disappears. That existing phase of the reality, the existing phase of the reality is considered titi. Is considered titi. So we call it persisting. Persisting. According to this explanation, it's a momentary persisting. It's a momentary arising, momentary persisting, momentary vanishing. It's a one explanation of explaining this thing. Then the second explanation is some realities come into existence, persist, and vanishes, but some realities just arises and suddenly vanishes. There are two types of reality. This is rupa and nama. Rupa means matter. This is mentality. Materiality, mentality. So in both those cases, we normally say this is the arising, this is the passing, this is the arising, this is the passing. So here, we take the persisting moment means the entire existence. The entire existence. It is not a separate phase. It is not a separate phase like this. Here, the arising part, arising phase, vanishing phase. Vanishing means the declining phase, arising phase. So another explanation is attita sabba dhammanan titinama pauchyati. This is the Pali explanation. The mere existence itself is called titi. Tita, right? So then, yeah, so I have to change this tita. Tita, this can also be said as titi. Better to say it's titi, right? It's a grammatical thing. Just sorry for that. Just change this titi. So titi means the entire existence, existing moment, not a separate state. That is the second way of explaining this. This doesn't matter. Like this doesn't matter means it doesn't greatly affects our practice, because in the actuality it is very, you cannot observe these kind of small things. This is just the philosophical purpose of explaining how thing happens, and it has a great philosophical value. The third explanation is third explanation means things arise and pass away, but it happens in generations. It happens in generations. This entire generation, there are momentary arisings, momentary passings away. In each every moment, there's arising and passing away. But then this process remains as a generation. The persisting of the generation of realities is called titi. That's the third explanation. That's the third explanation. An example for this. We get attached to a certain object. We get attached to a certain object. So that time, mind keeps on wandering about it again and again, again and again. We can say, so these thoughts regarding that object, these thoughts occur in groups. So one group of thought processes, the attachment regarding an object can be considered. So its existing phase, like it momentarily mind is arising and passing away, mind is arising and passing away, but it keeps on happening. So that phase is called titi. Is the persisting phase of a generation of realities. It's not a momentary existence, according to the third explanation. So just I want to show that all the teachers that the Theravadians accept about this persisting moment, there are different ways of interpreting this, different ways of whatever it is. So these are the characteristics of conditioned realities. Then we also have a word called anyatatta. Anyatatta we translated as alternation, a change, alternation, right? Alternation. So this change we let's write it. Okay, well, I'll take it here. Anyatatta. We call it a change. We call it a change. So what is the change? So you can see in this diagram, just a diagram to show that how the so these lines show the ability to exist. This is not showing the reality. Reality in the actual sense, according to Buddhism, it completely comes up suddenly. Suddenly means it's not that the chitta grows like a tree. Chitta suddenly appears and it remains and completely vanishes in an instant. It's not that the chitta grows with this and slowly reduces like fading away. No, a reality completely comes into existence in completion, in a full-fledged manner, in a full-fledged nature. It's not that the 1/3 of the reality appears, then it grows into the 2/3 of the reality and comes into completion at this peak moment. No. A reality appears completely at the arising moment, at the beginning of the arising moment, and it completely disappears. There is no reduction in its quality. It's not shrinking like something like a material stuff. So what does this diagram shows? That this is the ability of the reality to exist. It is strength to exist. So strength to exist increases and comes into a peak moment, and then it declines and passes away. So this doesn't show that the amount of the reality is increasing and decreasing. This says the strength of the reality to exist increases and decreases. A chitta arises in us. Just zoom that moment. Just if you hold that moment. Chitta arises, existing and passes away. If we just zoom this moment and try to analyze. So during its first appearance, chitta appears in a full-fledged manner. It's completely appearing. Then what happens? So this arising is a plus force because it comes from non-existence to existence. So what happens? This, it's like an acceleration. When you come from 0 to 1, there was also always be an acceleration. You cannot start a vehicle gradually. Always there is a jump from 0 to some force. It's not a gradual increasing. So likewise, when a reality comes into the existence, it's a plus force. Then what happens? This plus force starts to continue. But it is obstructed by a phenomenon called aging. Obstructed by a phenomenon called aging. So if we draw it more precisely, as some teachers have suggested, so when the force, the ability to exist, the reality comes in, the force, the ability is in a plus moment, then it has to increase, but it doesn't go like this. It goes in this way. Why is that? Because it's obstructed. There's an obstructing force, like the counter force in a surface when we move. Like, I forgot the word for that. When we move forward, there is a counter force from the surface which reduces the acceleration, which causes for the reduction of the velocity. So So here what happens in actual way, the strength reduces like this. Why this reduction happens? Because it's opposed by a force called aging, phenomenon called aging. So this is the strength of the reality to exist, we call strength to exist. It's not the strength of the reality. It's not the power of the reality. It's strength, ability to exist. So it comes into this moment and then it starts to decline. So what happens is, from this moment onwards, from its rising moment till its vanishing, then suddenly it drops at a certain moment. Certain moment it completely vanishes. So I would call like this, completely disappears at a certain moment. So this we can see there is always an alternation. Alternation means it's aging, it's changing. What is the change which happens in a reality? There are, we can say, two types of changes. A reality reduces in its quality, or reality's ability to exist reduces. It reduces its ability to exist. So according to Theravadians, during an alternation, momentary aging, momentary change doesn't mean the qualities of the reality is reducing. It means, it implies that the ability to exist reduces. It's weakening, we call. It's weakening. So this weakening is called anyatattva. We call a change. It's not stable. Even during this momentary existence, it's in a flux. It means it changes. It's not always the same. Even during this momentary existence, it ages, it weakens, and suddenly at the end, it completely disappears. So this is what the Buddha mentioned as the three characteristics of this conditioned reality. So we have four characteristics. How do we define them? What are the three out of the four? According to the teachings, arising is a characteristic, vanishing is a characteristic, alternation is a characteristic. These are the three characteristics. It arises, it vanishes, it undergoes a change. It undergoes a change, right? So normally we call them in Pali, arising is jati, alternation is jara, vanishing is marana. So we call them jati, jara, marana. So if it is a conditioned reality, if something is a conditioned reality, what happens? It has these three characteristics: arises, changes, and passes away. So then what is this? So with this point, we have another aspect to look into the conditioned realities. Conditioned realities. So we bring this sthiti here. We bring this here. Titi, persisting. Then we bring also upada and vaya. Upada and vaya. Upada is arising. Vaya is vanishing. Titi is persisting. So then we have another three we can call characteristics. It arises, it persists, it vanishes. There are arguments about how to understand the persisting within the tradition. Within the tradition, these differences of ideologies didn't make the tradition to break into two schools, because all the teachers all these scholars accept all the other basic fundamentals, there is an argument about it. There is some opinions about this. This hasn't caused for the Theravadians to split into two. Though it seems like a very huge point of disagreement, but still it hasn't caused. So they all follow the same practice, and this has not affected the practice, because impermanence, suffering, non-selfness, these theories have not affected them. So therefore, they can still coexist. Now, these Upada, Vaya, and Titi, Upada, Vaya, and Anyatatta. If I bring it here, Anyatatta. This is called persisting. Sorry, change. Change is called Jara. So now we have two categories. Upada, Titi, Vaya, or Bhanga we call. Upada, Anyatatta, Vaya, or Jati, Jara, Marana. So out of this sutta the Buddha uttered, we can easily see there are 4 words, but he mentioned it's only 3 characteristics. We have 4 words to explain 3 characteristics. So what has happened? The Theravadians advocate these are the 3 characteristics of conditioned reality. These are the 3 characteristics of conditioned realities. These are the 3 phases of existence of a conditioned realities. 3 phases of existence. There are 3 characteristics of existence. So it means a phase in which a reality exists can be divided into 3. Upada, Titi, Vaya. Vaya we call also a synonym for Vaya is Bhanga. I think some of you are familiar with this. Vaya is Bhanga. Right, Bhanga. Then the characteristic of conditioned realities, we use these words Jati, Jara, and Marana. Right, Upada, Titi, Bhanga, Jati, Jara, and Marana. So these are the phases, 3 phases in which they exist. These are the 3 characteristics that are found in conditioned realities. According to the commentaries, they have completely equalized this. They have said Titi is equal to Jara. Upada and Vaya, there is no problem. It's always equal. Right? They say that the Titi is equal to Jara. According to some teachers, Titi is a phase of existence. Jara is the alternation. This is something that happens, the weakening of the reality. Jara can be explained in 2 ways: as a phenomenon, as a subjective phenomenon, and also an abstract phenomenon. Jara, it's like the opposing quality that weakens the opposing nature, that weakens the ability of a reality to exist. It is a huge topic, like a different topic. So here what I'm following is the opinion of other teachers, not following the commentarial explanation. I'm following that the Jara and Titi are 2 different things. Titi is the phase of existence during which it exists. While during that time, we can observe an alternation. That's why the Buddha mentioned titassa anyatattang panyayati. An alternation can be seen of the persisting reality. But when you go into the commentarial literature, I have to say this because if someone reads the commentaries in Pali, they would find that my statement would contradict with the commentary. According to that, Jara and Tithi are identical. Jara and Tithi are identical. But I'm following the explanation of other teachers. For example, Venerable Lady Sayadaw, when he explains about this, he takes Jara as a phenomenon, like the alternation which happens. He didn't specifically say that these are two, but when you read, you can understand that Tithi is just a phase, Jara is something that happens to the reality. It's a weakening, some phenomenon which happens to the reality. So these are the basic characteristics and phases, basic characteristic of the conditioned reality, the phases, channels of or phases through which the reality exists. Yeah, so this is the first point that I discussed today. Now, based on this, we come into another very important aspect in the Buddhist teachings. Now, based on Upada and Vaya, just forget about Tithi for a while. I'm just focusing on Upada and Vaya. So if you focus on Upada and Vaya, we can see a reality arises and reality passes away. A reality arises and reality passes away. Before it's arising, it didn't exist. After it's passing away, it doesn't exist. Now, a reality which has arisen and passed away is called Atita, mean past. Atita. Think about chitta, consciousness, which happened yesterday. One consciousness, one act of knowing, one act of cognition. Maybe while you are meditating, while you're observing, while we think about something, a consciousness awareness appears and disappears. So that awareness which appeared and passed away is called the past reality. Sometimes if we post the time, for instance, to explain it, a reality arises before it's passing away. Arises, but it's in the existing momentary existing phase, but it hasn't passed away yet. We call it Pachuppanna, present. We call it present. This is a reality. We are not talking about the abstract time as we think in our day-to-day life. When we think about the past, we think about the time. Something, it's very difficult to explain time in that abstract nature. So here in Theravada Buddhism, we don't talk about the abstract time when we say past, present, and future in terms of Abhidhamma, in terms of realities. A reality which has arisen and passed away is past. A reality which has arisen but not passed away is present. A reality which hasn't arisen yet is called future. We call it Anagata. We call it future. So this definition of past, present, and future is based on one characteristic, and specifically two characteristics: Upada, arising, and Vaya, passing away. If a reality has arisen and passed away already, this reality should be called Atita or past. A reality has come into existence, it has arisen, but not passed away yet. This is called Pachuppanna or present. A reality has not come into arisen, so nothing to say about it is passing away. It is supposed it is when it arises in future, it has not come into arisen. This reality which will arise is called future or Anagata. Anagata. So how do we differentiate with Anupanna and Anagata? We'll talk this later. How to focus on that. just to be focusing on Paramatta Dhammas that hasn't come into existence yet. It's called Anagata. So when we talk about the division of time based on time in Theravada Buddhism, we don't go into explain it about based on the abstract time. We are talking based on the realities, based on the realities. So then we also know a word called time-freed. Time-freed realities. Time-freed is nirvana. Time-freed is nibbana, which doesn't fall into any time. So this time-freed nature of nibbana, if we try to think about it based on our ordinary knowledge about time, the time that we experience, that we think that we experience, the moment of now, which is always changing, like we come into new now moments. So we consider the time is going. So scientifically, it is something a new dimension. We are talking in perspective of Theravadians. So we Theravadians do not talk about such a time. So what does it mean by time freed? So according to, in Pali, we call Kala Muttaka. Kala Muttaka. Right? So now we have to take our mind out from the concept of time that we have in our day-to-day life. Now just focus on this aspect. Why something is called past? Because it has come into arisen and disappeared. A reality is called past, not the time. A reality which has come into existence but not passed away is called present. Reality which has not come into existence is called future. A reality which does not have any arising, cannot be differentiated as past, present, or future. Why is that? Because the past, present, future classification is based on the nature of arising. If something does not arise, like nirvana, it cannot be called past, present, or future. I'm sure the thought that would appear in you is, does nirvana exist? Yes, it does. Nirvana exists. Even at this moment it exists. Then why can't we call it present? Because there is a specific definition for the present in Theravadians. There's a specific definition for present. What is the definition? If something out of non-existence comes into existence, and which is in the persisting phase and not yet vanished, that is a reality that should be called present. Presentness here doesn't mean that the nature of something which exists. Having an intrinsic nature, having an intrinsic quality, doesn't qualifies it to be called Pachuppanna or present. Nirvana has its peaceful nature, Santilakkana. But it has no arising. It has been there for all the time. Throughout the entire, it has been there, according to Theravada. So it can be experienced even now if someone practices well. But it should not be called present. It should not be called Pachuppanna in Pali. It should not be called present in Theravada's perspective. Present means Pachuppanna I'm talking. It's better to use the Pali word, otherwise this can lead for confusion. If you use the Pachuppanna word, you cannot use the Pachuppanna for Nirvana, because Pachuppanna is a reality which arises, which has arisen and not passed away yet. So that is why the Theravadians call Nirvana as time freed. Why is that? The classification of realities based on time is due to its nature of arising and passing away. Since nirvana doesn't have the qualities of arising and passing away, it does not fit here, but it does exist even at this moment. So it's a very important point according to the Theravadians, the very imperative fundamental that we find in this doctrine. So then to conclude, like we discussed 2 points. Based on this sutta, characteristics of conditioned realities and the phases in which the reality is found, and also the classification of realities based on these characteristics. Then some philosophical point of view. In philosophical point of view, discussion about anagata realities. Buddha was very confident about saying the future realities. Future is not determined according to Buddhism, but he said whatever reality happens in future, past, present or future, whatever reality happens in another 100,000 eons or years, whatever it is, whatever the time it is, whatever consciousness appears in future has the characteristics of knowing an object. It has the characteristics of impermanence, suffering, and non-selfness. It is not possible that a consciousness may appear being permanent. It is impossible that a consciousness would bring ultimately happiness. It is impossible that a consciousness would be a self. So he knows the natures of the realities that would happen in future. It doesn't mean that everything in future is predictable. Not every incident is predictable. No, according to Buddhism. According to Buddhism, whatever happens in future, that realities which will occur in any incident can be predictable. That means whoever is born in whatever eon or whatever world cycle, they may have 5 aggregates. They will have consciousness and matter. So Buddha was very confident, and those consciousness and matter would never be permanent, blissful, or be a self. So this anagata, the prediction of the nature of anagata reality, not the prediction of the anagata future incidences. Prediction of the future realities suggests that there is a certain phenomenon. Which governs the nature, the quality of these realities. According to the Buddhism, this is a huge debate going in the scientific field. Are there such laws? Is the nature of the world is determined or not? It's a huge debate going on in the philosophical field of science. But according to Theravadians, this is already defined religion. It's not evolving, these kind of traditions. So according to them, the nature of the realities has already been determined, not the incidents. I'm repeating again, otherwise we'll go into a deterministic doctrine. The nature of the realities which happen in future are determined. It means whatever consciousness, whatever feeling, whatever perception which happens in future will have the same intrinsic nature, and will also have the unique universal characteristics. They will always be impermanent, they will always be suffering, they will always be non-self. So someone can argue, isn't it possible, how it is not possible that in another 100,000 years a consciousness which would never vanish, can't it appear like that? Is the possibility of a permanent consciousness is completely negated in a far away future? It may be, okay, it happened in past, all of the consciousness which occurred in the past are impermanent. What happens in the present is impermanent. Can't the universe evolve and its dynamics change and its laws change? Some physicians, some scientists suggest that the laws of the world is evolving according to them. It's their view. But according to Buddhism, what the Buddha has advocated, according to his strong, confident sayings, according to his confidence, it seems that Buddha has mentioned that the nature of the realities are determined by a certain phenomenon. So what the enlightenment is, he understood this phenomenon. So he could say, whatever the world you are born into, whatever the eon you are born in, always the realities, the conditioned realities have these characteristics. So we can just say these are the characteristics of the conditioned realities, but attributing them to future realities, implicitly states that, implicitly indicates that he has advocated about a phenomenon by which the nature of the realities have already been determined. Not determined. Determined doesn't mean determined by a God, not a person. It's the natural laws. We call it dhammatas according to Buddhism. So then all these, so when we come into this, we can also explain it like, so knowing this phenomenon, we can understand the nature of consciousness. It can be an abstract object. So like these realities are arising and passing away. They can be found in entities, past reality, present reality, future reality. And also we can think about an abstract object called the consciousness, like the nature of the consciousness. This would be the same to all the realities. So at that time, we may think about an abstract nature, but based on our experience. Like these are the things that we experience. These are the things that we experience, like past reality, present reality, or future reality. Looking into this, we can think about a common characteristic of the consciousness, like this is how a consciousness will appear whenever it appears. And in Theravāda Vipassana, that object is what is necessary, what is required for Vipassana meditation. It is not necessary that you focus on always on the present objects to understand the truth of the world. This abstract idea of reality is enough, because when we think about, now to bring it into a very with a simple analogy, if we think about the classification, division of beings into sex, like males and females, we normally say there are two types of genders. There can be a transgender and some other variations, but basically we can put them into male and female groups mostly, because there is no specific other type of gender, like third type of gender. If we assume, like, if we assume that there is only two genders, for instance, there can be arguments on that. So if you assume that there is two genders, and then we start to think about this, like whoever is born in future will have one of these genders. There cannot be a third gender. So if you know that reality is exactly this, reality is that whoever is born is classified in two genders. So then when we think about this object of gender, like whoever is born will be in two genders, this idea of gender is not a concept. It's not a concept. It's an idea of a reality. If we take the gender as a reality, and if we are able to put the two people, all the beings into these categorizations, and we think about this idea of gender, it's an abstract object. The philosophers have discussed about this, the redness and the red objects and so forth. So according to Buddhism, if you think about this abstract object of gender, it's not a concept. It's an idea of reality. So likewise, when we think about the nature of consciousness, without focusing on past, present, or future, without classifying them into these groups, this idea of consciousness is an ultimate object. It's an ultimate idea. For that, we are based on our past experiences about these incidents or these realities. But it is not, when we do the Vipassana meditation, according to the Theravāda doctrine, there can be certain techniques adapted based on these the doctrine. But if you go into the core essence of the Theravāda Vipassana, advocated by the Buddha and also explained by the commentaries, we find that abstract object of reality is enough for one to lead Vipassana meditation. So just I'll conclude the lecture with a small explanation given in the Visuddhimagga, a training method that was used thousands of years in the Theravada tradition. We are supposed to contemplate the impermanence of Rupa, having divided the life into 10 decades. 10 decades. Like the Rupa in the first decade passed away and didn't move to the second decade. The Rupas in the second decade didn't pass to the third decade. So likewise, we are supposed to contemplate till the 10th decade. Buddha has divided the life into these decades. So while we are contemplating the 9th decade, the Rupa of this 9th decade would not go after the death. It would vanish in this life itself. A yogi is meditating now. For instance, if I meditate in 30s, I would think about I'm supposed to meditate upon my Rupas in the 90s at this moment. So one argument is, okay, if I happen to live till 90s, I'll be focusing on anagata realities. If I happen to live till 90s, even at this moment, if it's not clear, maybe I'll be focusing on anagata reality. But it is not sure whether I'll live for 90s or not. Most probably not. So what does it mean? If I happen to die in 70s, if I happen to die in 80s, my contemplation today done on 9 objects in 90s, is it valid? Would that effect to eradicate my defilements? Yes, according to the Theravadians. So what does it imply? My object was not a mere anagata reality. It was an idea of the realities. Whatever Rupa which happens in whatever decade, like whatever 10 years, would vanish within that decade, but not move into another year, another life. So therefore, this future realities indicates about a phenomenon which governs the natures of the realities, and knowing that nature, we are able to think about that abstract object of a reality that is surely based on our experience on the ultimate realities, that there's no doubt in it. But based on that, we are able to understand the real, and then we are able to guess, we are able to infer whatever reality happens in whatever world cycle or whatever time phrase, they will have the same characteristics, and contemplating on them is what called vipassana according to the Theravadians. But if someone focuses on past, present, future objects, or always try to focus on present objects that we encounter, that is not a problem. That is just the technique adapted by the main group, like the huge pool of this meditation information. It's not a problem. It doesn't go against the Theravada tradition. But saying that all vipassana is always on the present object, present moment, is a wrong advocation according to the Theravada. It has no valid support at all from the Theravada doctrine. Not at all, I would call. So according to Theravadians, vipassana is based on this idea. And just to conclude, yeah, I've taken almost already more time than what I'm supposed to. So this, to conclude, that atita objects, paccuppanna and anagata objects, yeah, I think this will be free. This will be cleared from this. So the atita object has already passed away. Anagata object has not arisen yet. So according to Theravadians, they are non-existing. They are non-existing. Why? They have completely vanished. They have not come into existence yet. They are existing. These are existing. But all of them has the ultimate nature. They all possess intrinsic characteristic. They possessed, they are possessing, they will possess. So they are existence. These past realities are existence. Future realities are existence. Present realities are existence. So in Vipassana meditation, what matters is, as long as you focus on an existent, that's enough. The non-existing or existing nature has no effect at all in our Vipassana meditation. Because nature of having an intrinsic nature is what matters when we do Vipassana meditation. We are focusing on these natures, not on the existing or non-existing nature of a reality. Because a present reality is an existent, it has its intrinsic nature, but at the moment also it's existing. But a future reality will have an intrinsic nature, but it is not existing at the moment. We focus from here. A past reality had an intrinsic nature, and at the moment is not existing anymore. So therefore, the existing quality has no whatsoever influence or support or whatever sense, it has no effect on this Vipassana meditation. So that's then, yeah. So this is the thing. Last point is Vipassana meditation cannot be done on this present object. It is impossible theoretically. When you focus on your mind, a chitta arises, you focus on that chitta, it has already passed away, it has become a past object. Because no chittas, two chittas can appear at the same time. When we focus, we see an object from our eye consciousness, process goes. In that process, Vipassana can never occur. If you do Vipassana on that object, it has to happen by another later mind process. At that time, that object has already passed away after 17 mind moments. So therefore, present moment Vipassana is not possible in Theravadians. It can happen in two very rare occasions when we observe, contemplate the impermanent suffering and non-selfness of others, aggregates of others. There can be a moment like they coexist, our observation and the reality. And sometimes if we take through mere mind though, certain objects of our body, that is possible, but that's not the case, which happens most of the time. For example, if you are seeing the rising and falling of the abdomen, you feel it with the body consciousness first. That process finishes. When you're observing the impermanent suffering and non-self, that object has already become past. So there is no such thing called present moment Vipassana theoretically, technically, and also the existing nature is not important in Vipassana meditation. I'll be concluding. These all realities are momentary existing according to the Theravada tradition. So that's the lecture I would like to give today. And if you have any questions on this, please go forward and ask.
Okay. Sadhu, 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 Bhante. So for everyone, if you have any questions, please raise your hand or put your question in the chat box. And then if, in case you raise your hand, then we are going to unmute you. Hi, Bhante. So I see two questions on the chat box. They are kind of the same. So
yes.
the question is, what is the intrinsic nature of Nibbana? And the other one is, what is the intrinsic nature of Citta?
Okay. So intrinsic, thank you for that question. Intrinsic nature of a chitta is to focus on an object. It's like we call it vijnana. Normally chitta is called vijnana in Pali. Right. So this comes from V plus Nya. In Sanskrit, it's Jna, right? Anyway, so this Jna gives the meaning of to know. To know. This is how the word is formed. So this Jna gives the meaning to know. This V gives the meaning having separated. Having separated. So what does it mean? There are various objects in the world, thousands of objects. So when we think about an object at one time, we focus at one only. So there are various objects in the world. So out of them, if we think about this object, right, by the chitta, consciousness, chitta and vijnana are same, identical. So when we focus on one object, we ignore all the others momentarily. So this is like taking one object, having separated it from others. So what does it mean? Focusing on one object at a time. So if we can also simplify this meaning as the focus of an object towards an object. The focus that we make towards an object is vijnana. What happens when we focus? Focus means we are aware of it. It becomes tangible to us. We start to know about it. It's not completely, it's like, it's a very strange phenomenon if you think in objective way. It's like things are there regardless of whatever it is, it's still existing. So we become aware of some things. We tend to know what is happening there. So why this connection happens? Because of a reality called vijnana, by which are aware of certain objects. So vijnana is the intrinsic nature is to know the object having separated from others. It delimits the object. Delimits means like there are various types of objects that we can take at the same time, but our mind focuses on one at a time. So it delimits the other one object from others, so we can focus. So when vijnana can focus on one object, like there are various objects, right? So vijnana chitta focuses on this object, having separated it from others, for instance. So when the focus is there towards that object, all the other mental factors can perform their functions. So when we have a focus on a particular object, the taste of that object can be felt. That object can be recognized from others. Recognition means each and every object has a unique quality which enables us to distinguish it from others. So we become sensitive to that. So we feel like it is something new, it is something different from others. We are able to recognize it. That is called recognition. So likewise, all the other mental factors we call chetasikas can perform their function based on this focus. So that's why Buddha mentioned mind is the forerunner in this mental sphere. Only when the focus is there, all the mental acts can be performed based on that. So that is the answer for intrinsic nature of chitta or vijnana. Then the intrinsic nature of nibbana is, nibbana has to be explained in two ways actually. I'll keep it for a future lecture because I can just give like it's the peacefulness, it's the state which is freed from all the suffering. It's one explanation, a state freed from all the suffering. It is not mixed with suffering. Another approach to explain is it is the non-arising of the unarisen suffering. Like suffering is supposed to happen. Suffering is supposed to happen as long as the causes remain. If you remember in our diagram. So those, when the causes are removed, that suffering that was supposed to happen would cease without arising. So that ceasing is also called nibbana, and also we have to mention it is a state which is freed from all the suffering. We'll discuss this point when we come to the lecture of nirvana, but otherwise I have to explain it in detail how to understand its characteristics.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. I don't see any other question, and I also don't see any hand. So in the meantime, Bhante, I have a question. So this question is from the previous lecture, and also you mentioned it during this lecture as well. So I just want to be clear about this. So when you say that Paramathanamba Dhamma is nature, not thing, then could you please explain a little bit on what do you mean by thing?
Right. Thank you for that. So I think everyone heard the question. We mentioned Paramatta Dhammas are not things. They are just characteristics. They are just natures. And then this can also, we also explain Paramatta Dhammas as entities. We also explain Paramatta Dhammas as entities. So then we come into three divisions as I understand. Something which is abstract. We have three explanations on this. Abstract, then particulars, right? Particulars. So these particulars are twofold. Material, no, it should go down. Material particulars and non-material particulars. Then these material particulars are also, according to us, we divide into two: material characteristics then things, material things. So this is the division. So when we say abstract, abstract means like a phenomenon, or like what we discussed, like when we think about the realities. Now there are red objects and something which is called redness, or there is consciousness, past, present, future. We think about the quality of a consciousness. It's an abstract thing. We cannot specifically point it out. This is it. So in actual sense, Buddhism talks about particulars, not abstracts. Abstracts means something that only can be felt with mind, that cannot be felt in the outside world. So when we say in Vipassana, we have an abstract object, what did I mean was, it is not necessary that the object that we focus should exist in the reality as it is, like in the actual reality. It's just the idea of a consciousness and so forth. So we are not talking about abstract object. Abstract means like something which is merely made on mind. So in philosophy, we have a point called red objects and the redness. Does redness exist in the phenomenon? So some would say there is something called redness, and that can be seen, or that is what is found in red objects. Some would say red objects, only red objects exist, not the redness. So according to Buddhism, we don't talk about existence of abstracts. We are not talking about existence of abstract. We are talking about particulars. They are just, we can call, I'll use the word things. There are entities. Then we have material and non-material particulars. Non-material particulars is consciousness, which is not, doesn't have any qualities of matter. So matter is defined normally, as far as I know, matter is something that consumes some space. All the matters, the particles, according to physics, have a certain shape, or they take some space, they move in certain spaces. So these are called material things, I would call material. So a particle like a photon or like a electron, they are material things. We can normally show their diameter and so forth, the size, their weight, and everything can be measured. So they are things. So when we say non-material, means they don't appear as things, but they are particular natures. Particular natures means they are not mere abstract. So consciousness has its own intrinsic nature. He says it's arising and passing away. It cannot be defined based on matter. So particulars means the best word we can use is entity. We normally say it as, we can say it as a thing, but it's an immaterial thing. It's an immaterial immaterial entity because it doesn't have the characteristics of matter. Then when we come to the sphere of matter, material particulars, in general sense, we have material things like the subatomic particles and so forth. And in Buddhism, we have material characteristics. They are also particulars, like hardness is a particular. It's a one kind of a quality. It's a one kind of a quality. So how can we define a quality? Quality now, if we take this as a rupa kalapa, this quality exists all over this place. So it appears like an entity. It appears like an entity. That entity may have differences in the hardness, more hardness, less hardness. The nature may be different according to the books. But this, not this thing, it's a nature which exists in this space. So we call it a particular because it has its own arising, own passing away, and it has its nature which we can differentiate it from other material qualities. So when we say in Buddhism, material characteristics are also particulars. Non-material like mind and chitta chaitasikas are non-material particulars. They have their own identity. But according to Buddhism, material things are not realities. They are not realities. Material things are made out of material characteristics. So when we say a thing, I was based on the definition that thing consumes a space, thing has a weight. So these, if you take them individually, these material qualities do not have a weight, do not have a shape, they do not consume any space. So my explanation was things, the idea of things is based on the material things, not on this particular aspect. Like, so when we say in Theravāda tradition, matter is a material characteristic of particulars, non-material characteristics are also particulars.
Thank you. Sadhu, Bhante.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah. I see one more question on the chat box. So the question is, does non-existing reality mean non-paccuppanna reality?
Yes, exactly. So this point, after now, next week, I'll be starting to explain about consciousness, mental factors, and material qualities in brief. It will take few lectures. And then I will go into, because I want to explain about the Paramatta Dhammas in brief, what they are. Then we go into Paramatta Jatika, Anupanna Dhamma, Upadino Dhamma. At the end of those lectures, I'll be explaining there are three types of main non-existences. So when we talk about Paramatta Dhammas, if you remember the classification, Paramatta Dhammas, in terms of Paramatta Dhammas, the existing Paramatta Dhammas are the past and future. The existing Paramatta Dhammas are present only. But when we come into Paramatta Jatika, Anupanna Dhamma, and Upadino Dhamma, we have to explain the existing nature and non-existing nature in different ways. So like if I just give a brief explanation on this, like an Arahant has eradicated defilements. So before eradication, while we are doing kusala also, we have that defiling nature underlying in our mind stream. So it's existing, but not in the sense of Paramatta Dhamma Paccuppanna existence. It's in the Paramatta Jatika level of existence. So when one eradicates the defilements, then after it is non-existing anymore. Anupanna Dhammas, when the causes are prevailing, there are going to happen some effects. So those effects are considered existing by the Buddha in some suttas. That why is that? Because we are bound with them. We are bound with them. So then when the causes are removed, those realities that are supposed to happen come into non-existence. So in Anupanna level, there is an existing, non-existing difference. When we come to Paramatta Jatika level, there is an existing, non-existing difference. In Paramatta Jatika level, existence of defilements and existence of karma has to be explained in two different ways based on the Udana commentary. Then we come into Upadino Dhamma. So there is an existing level, non-existing level. When we come into Paramatta Dhammas that we discussed today, the existing is the Pachupanna, non-existing are Atita and Anagata. Then we go further in this diagram. If you remember, the top was Paramatta, just an adjective, not modified by any other word, just a Paramatta. So in this Paramatta level, Paramatta means that in the diagram, what is considered, because it covers the entire thing, conditioned and unconditioned all, if you remember, it was top of the list. So in this level, to distinguish some is existing or non-existing is if something has an intrinsic nature. If something has an intrinsic nature, it is existing, and things that doesn't have an intrinsic nature, like the concepts, are non-existing. So in the diagram, we had, if you remember, we had Paramatta, then we had Paramatta Dhamma, Paramatta Jatika, Anupanna Dhamma, and Upadino Dhamma. And here we have a few Nibbana, Sankatas. Then here we had Panyati. So in this level, existing, non-existing. Then in the existing part, existing means they are, yeah, we can call they exist, they do not exist because they don't have intrinsic nature. So in this part, here we have existing and non-existing. Here also we have existing, non-existing difference. So that I will be explaining further. So for your question, in the Paramatta Dhamma level, existing existence are the Pachupannas, Atita and Anagata are non-existing existence. But when you go into this level, all are existing. All are existing when we come into the. Why is that they are all existing? They all possess intrinsic natures. They all possess intrinsic natures. So these are just levels, different level of those intrinsic natures we call. I'll be explaining them in detail when we come maybe close to the end of these lectures.
Okay, sadhu, Bhante. Okay, I don't see any more questions, and then there is no hand either. So it's almost it's past the time, I think. But
okay.
May I have another question, Bhante? This from the previous lecture.
Okay. Okay. One question we can. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Bhante. So the question is, so let's see. So last time you explained to arrive at the conclusion that Paramatta Dhamma exists. So you give to the explanation is you see Pachupada Nakhanda Dukkha, and you said Dukkha, and then Dukkha Dukkati or something like that. So and then you arrive at the conclusion that Pachupada Nakhanda exists, and you said that in this case we understand. We don't understand. We should not understand that Pachupada Nakhanda means the thing that brings suffering. And then you give another example. You said Rupang Dukkhang Vedana Dukkha. But for those two examples that you said that we should understand those two things as Rupa and Vedana are the realities that bring suffering. So what's the difference? So on the one hand, the Panchupada Nakhanda are just suffering. They're not the things that bring suffering. But on the other hand, in those two examples, Rupa and Vedana are the things that bring suffering, the reality that brings suffering. So I don't quite understand why they are different.
Actually, then that would have been a mistake that I made, because my personal point of view is, as you said, Panchupadana Khanda are the realities that bring the suffering. Maybe when I was speaking, I may have slipped my tongue. Sorry for that. But what I wanted to say was Panchupadana Khanda Dukkha and Rupan Dukkha are identical.
I see.
Yeah.
I see.
Sorry for that. If I because of my negligence, if I slip my tongue, and maybe I have said that, don't think like that. But what I wanted to say was exactly what you said.
I see. But then also Bhante, because according to the Visuddhimagga, we know that a certain reality is called suffering because it has 4 characteristics, right? So because of the continuous oppression by arising and disappearing. This is the first one. The second one is because it's hard to bear. The next one is because this is the basis of suffering. And the last one is because of the precluding pleasure. So it looks like something is suffering, that is also suffering and the basis of suffering. So by being the basis of suffering means it brings the suffering. So it should have both of those qualities. So why in this case we have to distinguish these two according to your explanation last time?
Yeah, thank you for that question. Because according to the explanations given in Abhidhamma, in Theravadians, they define suffering like dukkha and dukkha satcha, they call. So dukkha is they have exclusive definitions on this. That is mental pain, that domanassa, in physical pain, that is dukkha vedana in body. So this is a definition that we cannot break. So when in the Yamaka it says dukkha and dukkha satcha, these are the dukkha. Dukkha satcha means if something is a base for these sufferings to occur, if something is a reason for these suffering to occur, that becomes a dukkha satcha. So what happens? When we say dukkha, it's exclusively these two. When we say dukkha satcha, all conditioned realities, all mundane conditioned realities, right? Mundane conditioned reality, except for lobha. We'll talk about that. So then, since we have a very clear definition on dukkha, so what happens is all the other realities are base for these dukkhas. So these dukkha can also be dukkha satcha, because domanassa vedana and dukkha vedana can also be a base for another dukkha or domanassa. So all of them fall into dukkha satcha. So to conclude that what is a dukkha satcha, it's not the mere dukkha, because in Yamaka Buddha it's mentioned that dukkha is specifically these two. So something to call dukkha satcha, the noble truth of dukkha, the the requirement is it becomes a base for these dukkha to happen. It becomes a base to dukkha to happen. So that is the definition of dukkha satcha. So then a question can come. So if this is a base, this is a cause for dukkha, this cause for dukkha, why there is something called cause of dukkha, origin of dukkha, samudaya? Why is that? So that samudaya, out of this we take lobha. Samudaya, it's quite different. So all the 5 aggregates are base. Base means they produce, they are the reasons for this dukkha to happen. While we have the aggregates, we encounter these dukkhas. But samudaya, lobha, the function is, it doesn't let the dukkha to get terminated at death. It doesn't let the dukkha to get terminated at death. So it causes the dukkha to continue after death. So that is what the Buddha mentioned about the origin of suffering. So while we have in our day-to-day life, because of body, we get dukkha, a lot of pain. Body itself is not a suffering, because suffering is exclusively defined. Body is a base for this suffering. When we have the body, we get those two pain. These are the exclusive suffering in Buddhism. So all the realities, they support this suffering. We have pleasant feeling. When it disappears, if we are attached to that, we get domanassa. We have a body, we get a lot of physical pain. When it gets old, we have a lot of mental suffering. So body, mental states, all these mundane qualities are bases for this suffering to happen. So that's why it's called a dukkha satcha. But there's also origin of suffering. So someone can argue, if this is the base of suffering, can't this be the cause of suffering? Yeah, it's a cause of suffering in one way. But the origin of suffering mentioned in the Noble Truths is not in this manner. That is, that the dukkha will not end at the death. It will continue from life to life. So therefore, when we think about the vipassana, when we know the understanding in Buddhism, knowing how the dukkha continues from life to life is very vital to understand that. So that is why there is samudaya satcha separately. So this is how would I explain? I would explain that.
Okay. Thank you so much, Bhante. Sadhu, sadhu.
Okay. So then we'll call it a day because the time has passed. And also,
Bhante,
yes, Sally.
may I say something before we finish the class?
Yes, sure.
Okay, because some friends are very interested about your Bali class. In the chat box, many people ask about the Bali class.
Chiran tithatu buddha sasanang chiran tithatu sadhu sadhu sadhu.
Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you so much, Bhante.